What is up everybody, it's Animac here for AnimeUproar, and in this video we will be talking about the self-proclaimed greatest psychic of the 21st century, the manipulative, lying, and generally shady Reigen Arataka from Mob Psycho 100. When we first meet Reigen, he is the sort of mentor of our hero Mob, a 14-year-old boy with amazing telekinetic powers. But we quickly learn that Reigen is actually a conman, someone with no psychic or spiritual abilities whatsoever, and yet someone who also happens to run a supernatural consulting agency. He basically takes money from people based on completely fraudulent claims that he has amazing psychic powers and is an expert on supernatural phenomena. In reality, Reigen has no powers, and whenever he needs to deal with a real supernatural problem, such as exorcising an evil spirit, he has to rely on his assistant Mob. We see Reigen manipulating everyone around him on a regular basis, including his clients and the media, and Reigen also tends to take Mob for granted at times. For example, calling him into work on very short notice and messing up all of Mob's plans in the process. So let's face it, at first glance, Reigen seems like a pretty terrible person. Someone who lies, manipulates, and scams gullible people out of their money. And with all of these things in mind, we might expect him to be the villain of the series, someone who Mob needs to kick to the curb in order to become a better and more independent person. And yet, Reigen is not a villain. In fact, he is a beloved character, and many fans of Mob Psycho consider Reigen to be their favorite character in the entire series. The thing is, Reigen is so popular that he even got his own manga spin-off. But how is this possible? Why would anyone think that this sweaty lying conman is someone we should actually like, support, and root for? The reason is this: Reigen is not a one-dimensional character. He is a nuanced and complex person, and the fact that he is a conman is only one aspect of his character. If you hate Reigen because he is a shady conman, and that is the entire extent of your take on the character, you are only scratching the surface of who Reigen really is. It's true that Reigen left his job as a regular salaryman to start a supernatural consulting agency, even though he had no psychic powers of his own. At first, he was basically a masseuse. He massaged his clients as part of what he calls a spiritual cleansing, and with many clients, this procedure actually helped them feel better. This is because in many cases, the clients that came to Reigen weren't really dealing with evil spirits or curses, they only thought that they were. So Reigen's spiritual cleansings served as a placebo. The clients, thinking that the evil spirit or curse had been removed, started to feel better even though there were no spirits or curses in the first place. Despite his obvious shadiness, Reigen is driven by the desire to change the world for the better, to make a difference, and this has been his desire ever since he was a student. By starting his own business, he wanted to do more good than he could as a regular salaryman. But he quickly realized that he was just a glorified masseuse, and he was about to abandon his agency until a young Mob came to ask him for help. Mob heard about the agency and came to Reigen because Mob was struggling to come to terms with his own psychic abilities. And believing that Reigen also had the same type of power, Mob was hoping that Reigen could help him control them better. At first, Reigen thinks that Mob is just a troubled kid with an overactive imagination, but he still feels bad for him. However, Reigen soon realizes that Mob really does have psychic powers, and so instead of abandoning the agency, Reigen decides to use Mob's incredible powers to deal with real spirits and with other supernatural threats. Despite the fact that he started off as a con artist, Reigen isn't just a con man. Paradoxically, even though he is a fraud, he is also a man with principles, a strong sense of right and wrong, and a desire to do good and help others. While using Mob to deal with all the real psychic threats, Reigen also helps his clients by giving them advice on life and helping them avoid getting tricked by other frauds like fortune tellers. On multiple occasions in the story, we also see that at his core, Reigen is a good person, like when he cancels an assignment to exorcise a family of harmless ghosts who just want to live together in peace, or when he refuses to accept payment in cases where he feels that it would be inappropriate to take the money. Reigen also makes Mob promise him not to use his powers against other people, or to use his power with murderous intent. And he does this because he knows that if Mob begins using his powers for dubious ends, Mob will no longer be the kind and good person he is now, and his power would corrupt him. It is clear that Reigen genuinely cares about Mob and his feelings. In episode 11 of season 1, we see Reigen take a major risk when he ventures into the headquarters of the Esper terrorist organization known as Claw because he was concerned for Mob's well-being. But let's be honest, it is clear that Reigen does have a tendency to take Mob for granted, like when he decides to call Mob into work on short notice because he just assumes that Mob has nothing better to do and that he has no friends or anyone else in his life who deserve his attention other than Reigen. This type of behavior leads Mob into thinking that Reigen might just be using him for his power, and this results in a falling out between the two of them. After they drift apart, Reigen ends up being humiliated on national television and he is attacked for being a fraud by the media. In this moment, Reigen comes to realize how much he depended on Mob and how much Mob has grown as a person in the years that they have known each other. When Mob sees Reigen being humiliated at a press conference, he decides to help him and uses his power to make it look like Reigen is indeed an Esper. After this, Reigen and Mob reconnect, and this proves that Reigen did indeed have a positive impact on Mob. Mob even says that he's always known what Reigen really was from the start, and what Reigen really is a genuinely good person. Even though he is far from a perfect mentor, and even though he sometimes takes Mob for granted, Reigen wasn't just using Mob. The two of them became friends along the way and established a real connection. Reigen is truly an interesting and complex character. On the one hand, he most definitely is a sweaty con man who manipulates people around him, and even though he has some positive traits like being intelligent, having a working knowledge of martial arts, and being a pretty hilarious guy in general, there is also a deeper aspect to his character. Whichever way you look at it, Reigen is far from the perfect mentor and far from the perfect hero. He is nowhere close to the ideal role model for Mob or for anyone else who happens to be watching the anime. But we love Reigen precisely because he is far from perfect. He is not a traditional anime mentor figure that we can look up to, someone like Kamina from Gurren Lagann, Yami from Black Clover, or All Might from MHA, to name just a few. Reigen is not a role model, he is not an inspirational underdog, but he is real. The shonen mentors and shonen heroes are the people we strive to be. They are role models who inspire us, but Reigen is just a deeply flawed guy in a suit who makes lots of mistakes, but who nevertheless has important redeeming qualities. As human beings who are not fictional characters, we are all far from perfect. We all have our flaws, but we would also like to think that we have our redeeming qualities. We would like to think that despite our imperfections, our insecurities, and our mediocrity, we can still grow and develop into better people. This is Reigen's story. He starts out as a regular salaryman who dreams of doing something more with his life. He turns into a con man, but he is about to give up that job until he meets Mob and feels a real sympathy for the young boy. Together with Mob, he is able to deal with real supernatural threats and really help people, even though he doesn't have any powers himself. Nevertheless, Reigen still makes mistakes. He lies a lot about being the greatest psychic in the universe, and he tends to manipulate the people around him and to take them for granted, including Mob. But even as he makes these mistakes, Reigen shows redeeming qualities, such as caring about Mob's feelings, worrying about his safety, genuinely wanting to help others, and recognizing that certain things are far more important than money. And Mob sees this too, and even he believes that Reigen is a genuinely good person. We love Reigen as a character precisely because he is not the ideal role model. We love him precisely because he's just a sweaty, lying, flawed character like the rest of us. We will never idolize Reigen as some sort of inspirational figure, but we can relate to his flaws. We can recognize that he is just a human like the rest of us, and we can also relate to his potential to develop and grow as a person, which is exactly what he has been doing throughout the course of the series. Yes, Reigen is a funny guy. Yes, his schemes are entertaining, and yes, his obnoxious confidence as a psychic, despite the fact that he has nothing to be confident about, is hilarious to watch. But that is not why we love him. At his core, Reigen is just like us, imperfect and flawed, but also kind, caring, and determined to make a difference in the world. And if this sweaty lying con man can learn to become a better person in spite of all of his faults, then so can the rest of us. And that is why we all love Reigen. If you enjoyed this video, you can leave a like to let me know. And if you're new to AnimeUproar, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Feel free to check us out on Twitter and Instagram at AnimeUproar for all the latest anime memes. I want to give a huge thank you to our AnimeUproar patrons, including our Pro Hero tier patrons, the one and only Gilgamesh and Keelan. We recently completely revamped our Patreon, so if you're interested in supporting more content on this channel, feel free to check us out, link in the description. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, see ya, Space Cowboys.